All right, now we've gotten the point in your story where you're working with the 2nd Battalion, the 506th. You've been talking some about Colonel Lucas, the battalion commander, and you were heading out to a fire base called Gladiator.
Correct.
Okay, now roughly when was that? Was Ripcord, we've already
We had not gotten we had not established troops on Ripcord at that point.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ripcord was still, we had people up there and got run off.
Right.
And that had happened twice
Right.
at that point.
Okay.
I think twice on.
Okay, so now we're kind of in early April 1970 before the people actually march up to the top and set it up. Okay.
Yes.
So pick up the story then from there.
Well, not much more. They built a talk there. I didn't like the talk. I didn't like when you're building a talk. When you're building a structure, a talk. It was a bunker, if you will, and the steps going in were from the uphill down. The way they had it, they didn't actually have steps. It was like a funnel going down into the talk.
So, was this on Gladiator or was
This
this
is on Gladiator.
Yeah. Okay.
And eventually, I'm sure they got it straightened out, but at that point they didn't have, and I didn't want to spend the night there, okay? For me, that's a funnel. It's when mortars come down, mortars come relatively straight down, they hit a funnel, they're gonna follow it. That goes right into the top. Didn't have a blast wall, didn't have basic things that to me were basic, okay? And I don't remember where I slept, but I didn't sleep in there that night. They were upset with me, and so that's okay. The next morning they went back to the rear and took showers and then came back out. And I was going to go back to the rear, but nothing ever came. I sat on the pad for a while and they came back and I was rather upset, which led to me being replaced.
Okay.
Yeah, I was upset. Anyway, the next day, Colonel Lucas had me come with him and we went back to the rear and we talked to my commander, and I got to talk to my commander. He was going to replace me, and he did. He had another captain come in, and Ray Williams. My boss, the S3, advised against it because it was a rough area. But anyway, he sent me back with this guy, and I was going to train him into my job. And when I was happy that he was able to do it, then I was to come back to work for the S3. And we were there for a day or two, I don't know, several days, and it became apparent to me that I didn't have enough time in country, and that's what I told my boss. I said, "Sir, I don't have enough time in country to get this guy back to where he ought to be." Okay, but anyway, I turned my stuff over to him, and I went back to the battalion headquarters, assistant S3.
Okay. And so is this like Camp Eagle or is this Evans?
Evans.
Okay, you're in Evans.
So I'm back at Evans, and assistant S3, signing fires, that kind of stuff. Not much happened, and the same kind of thing happened.
Were you aware of Ripcord being set up, or what?
I'm aware of it, but I wasn't out there.
Okay.
Now you're talking on the phone, on the radio,
Right.
radio
Right.
contact with people.
Right.
You wasn't out there and wasn't
Yeah.
flying around.
Right.
So I was aware of that being set up, and I was aware of assigning fires and the whole thing, but nothing specific. After a while, we had the incident on Fire Support Base Henderson, where the brigade commander, Colonel Bradley, and his S3, Major Tex Turner, the Artillery Liaison Officer, Captain Hopkins, Red Hopkins, and the Sergeant Major, and I think his name was Long or Longest. I'm not sure of his name, but they went in there and they were hit with a mortar round, and the sergeant major was killed, and Fred was wounded. He had a bad wound on the lower leg, and was basically medevac. That would have been the 3rd of May, I've been told. I don't remember dates, but that happened apparently on the 3rd of May. And if you read Chuck Hawkins wrote an article for the VFW, I believe it's for VFW, about Ripcord. He left the artillery officer out totally, and I confronted him with that during this meeting. He said, well, I probably left a lot of people out. And the significance of him leaving that out is that Fred was part of the party that came out with Colonel Bradley.
Right.
So leaving him out is significant. Whereas if he had been out there as part of the artillery out there, it would be coincidental. Anyway, same round that killed the sergeant major, wounded Fred. And I went over there, and it was right after it happened, so it would have been probably the 4th of May. They sent me over there. And then I was the artillery liaison with the 3rd Brigade until I rotated back to the States. So I left, and I can't tell you exactly when, perhaps 3 or 4 days before, so somewhere probably the 24th or 25th of May.
Okay.
I'm guessing, I don't remember directly.
All right.
I know the day I left, the day it was 1 year exactly, 29 May, and I left.
Okay. Now, were there any other kind of significant actions or things that went on that you were providing support for, or was it just mostly small or routine engagements?
Well, when you're dealing with the brigade commander, you're at a different level, of course. I don't know. I wasn't following as closely what was happening on Ripcord. I know that was going on, and that was a big part of the entire brigade's efforts.
Right.
I do know we went back to Henderson, and I was explained what happened, and pretty much the same story over and over again. But we went back there. It was secondhand knowledge, and I could tell you what they said, which is slightly different than the version that I heard going around, but nevertheless, it's essentially all right. Then we had an insertion. I'm not sure what we were going to do, but it was in the Quang Tri River. There was a sandbar on the edge of the river. We were flying around, and they decided they want to put an insertion right there on that sandbar. And I'm trying to find do an artillery prep. It's out of my normal amount of range, not communicating with the regular artillery battalion. So I ended up having to find somebody to do that. I'm pretty sure the Arvins did that out of Dong Ha or somewhere up there. I don't really remember. What happened though when they did an artillery prep is they blew the sandbar away, so they had to land on the banks of the river. It was just right by the banks of the river anyway. They did that and got inserted. It was okay.
I wonder why you would insert on a sandbar. I'm not sure what that would accomplish.
Who knows? I mean, who knows if there's mines on it? Who knows anything about it? And to do an artillery prep, I mean, it was anyway, the artillery prep blew it away, so it wasn't an issue anymore. Let me think, was there anything else that happened? It was really fairly routine. Colonel Bradley was fixing to leave, and he was talking about leaving and going back to Maine. Turns out he didn't go back to Maine. He went to Florida and became a real estate mogul or something. And Tex Turner, I don't know what. I know he went to the Ranger School. For a while he was a commandant of Ranger School. I don't know what else he did. And he's retired now, and last I heard he was in in Virginia, in near Williamsburg, somewhere up in there.
All right. So now you're heading out of Vietnam.
Out of Vietnam.
Where do you
go? We go, all right, so I'm in Vietnam, and I go to Camp Eagle. I flew down there and report to DeVarty, and you processed out, and you get on a truck to go to someplace else, and maybe Da Nang.
Probably Da Nang if it's a truck.
I don't really remember. I remember going, it's kind of a blur, but we went down the road. One thing I do remember, there were some NCOs who were on the same truck, and the NCOs were talking to other NCOs and talking about how they were too old to have been in the field. You know, they were just too old. They probably were 30. Okay, 30 to me is not old. 30's rather prime, but and I'm thinking to myself, it probably had something to do with that yellow stripe down your back rather than your age. Nevertheless, I didn't say anything. We went on. We got down there, and you had to report in, and I left out of Cam Ranh Bay, and went to Cam Ranh Bay, and you had to show up for the manifest. If your name was called, you went on and processed out whatever the rest of it was, and so, but you showed up for the next manifest when the next plane was coming. So I had some time. I went over the sand dunes and went out on the beach at Cam Ranh Bay. It was pretty neat. You could walk probably half a mile and only be waist deep in the water, fairly shallow. And came back and made the next manifest and came home. Flew to Osaka, Japan. I don't know why we went there, but that's where we were. And I'm in the duty-free shop, bought some stuff for my wife. Came on in. We went to Seattle, SeaTac. We are processed in, and we walk into this room, and an E6 NCO comes in wearing on his right shoulders to the left shoulder, he's got a 101st patch. And he starts giving us this stateside verbiage that y'all all out of this. I hate to think this because it irritates me every time I think about it. I'm wanting to go home. I don't want any trouble, and I don't want to go home. And this guy starts with this verbiage talking to officers and everybody else about we had our sleeves rolled up. And then stateside, you don't roll your sleeves up, okay? So we're in our jungle fatigues, but we've got our sleeves rolled up like we did. Yeah, okay. All you had to do was tell us, we would have rolled them down. And I'm just come back from a combat zone, and I really wanted to kill a person. All right, that's what I really wanted to do, or at least give him a punch or two, but I didn't do that, so we get processed out. So how you treat people, and they weren't treating us very well. You were treated better in Vietnam. It made a difference in Vietnam. I mean, you have to say that. Anyway, I got a flight home and came back home. My next assignment was Fort Sill. I went to the Artillery Advanced course. They were most of the. I knew a lot of the captains. We'd been together in Vietnam. So let's see. Ben King was there. Ben Phillips, Quigley, Art Quigley, and like there was one or two more I'd been with in Vietnam. We're in the same advanced course class, and got through that, and I was assigned to. I went to 3rd of the 17th 8-inch howitzers artillery in Nuremberg, Germany.
Okay.
Which was probably a mistake, but it was. You look back and see it's a mistake, and you don't see it looking forward. They had been deprived during the Vietnam era because everything went to Vietnam,
Right.
and so things were not in great shape. And the commander was not a great commander. He was a helicopter pilot. when I got there, Patton had just been on there. Patton, they have a lot of small bases around the major towns, or they did at that era. And so a movie would go into one and go to the next one and the next one, and you know, anyway, the Patton had just been on that base, and the colonel and the XO, his major, who was his shadow. Shadow's a good word, right? Anyway, his shadow both had swagger sticks. Okay, you can imagine this now, right? They got swagger sticks, and it was a interesting tour.
What was the attitude of German civilians toward Americans at this point? When there's more
They didn't
radical.
really care much for us. It was they were tolerant, mostly tolerant. Sometime while we were over there, they were making a movie about Hitler in Munich, and the actor who was playing Hitler walked down the street, and people stood and saluted. No lie.
Wow.
Okay, now that wasn't everybody, but it was interesting. It was interesting. Anyway, we got by fine. There was some attitude. Overall, we got one of the problems. Actually, one of the problems we had in Germany is that the people speak English. We didn't speak much German, so you end up learning a little GI German. Where did we live there? Let me think about that. First time, the second time. I have to sort through where we lived, because I was there. The first time I was there was in Wurzburg. We started out in on the economy, and then we moved it. I started out in the upstairs, an upstairs apartment from a German. It was about 20 miles away from base. I mean, it's a fairly long drive, but it's what you could find. If the Germans like to rent to Americans because they would move on. Germans, once they rented, they had more or less a contract until they got ready to move. So in a sense, they like to do. Anyway, we did that, and then I had another apartment. I found another apartment, and the landlady didn't like our little dog. Okay, she was afraid of dogs. They'd used dogs against them. She had seen that happen somewhere during the war. And anyway, so we ended up moving to a different apartment, and we were there for a while, and then didn't plan on going into quarters, but we were offered quarters, and we did go in and lived on base there. It was about a couple of blocks from where I worked. A lot more convenient. Didn't have to worry about the heat. I mean, everything's covered.
Right.
So I was we were in Merrill Barracks, and Merrill Barracks was built by Hitler in Nuremberg Germany, for the SS troops to control the crowds during the Nuremberg rallies. And he built it out of brick. It was built out of brick, well engineered. It was built to be faced with marble later, because you had deep windows that were faced in marble, and they were going to face it later with marble, and of course that never happened. In the chapel, they still had the decorations in the chapel, still had swastikas around the edge of the floor. Well, you say, but swastika is an ancient symbol of good luck, and you can find those in Jewish temples.
Yeah, you can find them in India.
Yes. So, but that was their symbol. It was a Nazi symbol. And that was Merrill Barracks. It was an interesting place. It was not a terribly great tour, but it worked out.
Okay. What, I don't know, was the caliber of the enlisted personnel that you had? We're kind of getting into that post-Vietnam era.
Well, it was post-Vietnam for me, but Vietnam was still,
going on. But we were
But the people that were there, we were still a draft army. We still had a bunch of people, and the drug culture was coming on.
Yeah.
Brought on probably initially in Vietnam, but we had problems with it over there. We had no tests for it.
Mhm.
This is before you could test for marijuana or any other
There's
drugs.
a point when heroin becomes a real problem, and it's
I
about.
don't know when heroin became a problem, but I know we had everything we had more than just marijuana.
Yeah.
But everything started with marijuana.
Mhm.
And you'd get fresh kids in and they would, oh, I'm going to be straight, I'm going to be straight. And you'd get them in and interview them. And 3 weeks later, they were smoking pot.
Mhm.
And it was the culture. I had a guy who went to a bar, several of them went to a bar, and they broke a window, a glass pane in the door in the bar, and left. And had been drinking. He was pretty much too drunk to feel the pain.
Mhm.
They walked back to the barracks. This is at night, and the MPs, when they call the MPs, they followed the blood trail to Merrill Barracks, and when they came into Merrill Barracks, they had the CQ go get the guy because they were afraid to go into the barracks. This is MPs, armed
Mhm.
MPs, all right? That's the culture we were dealing with.
Mhm.
Does that make sense to you? You probably haven't seen that, but that's,
Well, I knew, actually, I've talked to some people who were in Germany kind of in that period. At times there were definitely discipline problems.
there were discipline problems, and you couldn't get anything done, really. You couldn't. It was a major problem. The maintenance was a major problem. I think I mentioned maintenance once
Mhm.
before. The military, the Army had sold out to a maintenance program that didn't work.
Mhm.
Okay, and we had a maintenance warrant officer who was a good, probably a very good sergeant, but he wasn't a good maintenance warrant officer in that unit. He was, that was, for us, we were the lower echelon, he was an echelon above, so we were supposed to be able to send things to him to be fixed. The only thing I ever saw them fix was the commander's Jeep and their vehicle, which is a Jeep, all right? It's the only thing I ever saw them fix, period. You had to turn something in to get it fixed. You had to have everything there, and they go by and inspect, and then you might not get it back with everything on it, all the parts on it,
Mhm.
because they were prone to scavenge to keep their two little vehicles running.
Okay.
It was a nightmare.
So what was your actual job there?
I was a battery commander to start with.
Okay.
As a battery commander, I didn't do a great job at it, I had to admit. I did what I could do. We came in and I was supposed to be Alpha battery commander. And Alpha battery I think was okay. Bravo battery was the discipline battery. Everybody who needed discipline or didn't fit in got put in Bravo battery. The other thing was technically I had 100 people there, full complement.
Mhm.
I only had control of about 55, 56 of them. So you look in on paper and it looks like you're all there, so why can't you do? And let me tell you something. You cannot do 100% of the job all the time with half the people.
So
You
were the-
cannot maintain that over a long period of time.
So were the other people there or doing something else?
We
or-
were not at full strength
Okay.
by any means. None of it was full strength. The maintenance system, you couldn't get parts. Getting parts was a big problem. We couldn't get support. We had in our howitzers, 8-inch howitzers have the same engine transmission that a Greyhound bus has. Okay? Greyhound buses run, our engines didn't.
Mhm.
And when our engines didn't run, you can't get there, you can't move, shoot, and communicate.
Right.
So we could shoot, we could communicate, so better, but moving was a real problem. And we weren't supposed to change the power pack, the engine transmission that came together, and it was a big unit. We weren't supposed to do that at the battery level, but at the battery level, if we didn't do that, we had down weapons.
Mm-hmm.
So we ended up doing that at the battery level. I mean, out of necessity. There was a maintenance company on the base, and one of the things I had to go through in the interim before I went over there was go to Fort Knox, and we had a class. It was a week or two on maintenance. Knox was the big maintenance thing. And I went to that, and they said, yeah, go talk to the warrant officer. He'll be happy to see you. I went and talked to the guy when I first got there. I went and talked to the guy. He talked to our motor warrant. Our motor warrant talked to our battalion commander. Our battalion commander told me not to do that again. Okay? He might not have said it exactly like that, but that's what it came down to. Well, you're going to mess up the relationships we got going. We didn't have a relationship, right? We didn't have a relationship. And I was nice with the guy. I wasn't being ugly or anything. I just wanted to introduce myself. Tell him I was there. That wasn't the way he took it. Oh well. Now, you would like I like special forces a lot better, because if that had happened with special forces, we'd have just had it out and it'd been over. One of us sort of walked away, and the other one may or may not have. Anyway, different.
But special forces might have more of an interest in getting the job done too.
Special Forces is a good organization. That they do, and they're dedicated, and they move out. It's one of the better things I've done. When I got out of OCS, I applied for Airborne, Ranger, Special Forces, and didn't get it. I did that several times, didn't get it, but ended up there. So.
So when do you finish up the tour in Germany?
Well, that's not quite the end of it.
Okay.
So I went and left there, and I was there for a year as a battery commander, and was the S2, the Intel Security Officer. And we changed commanders, battalion commanders. So when classified material came in, I had to sign for it, okay? And I had to show it to the battalion commander. And he wanted me, the guy that came in was, you can trust me, guy, all right? I'm the battalion commander, and you can trust me, so I don't need to sign for it. Bullshit, I'm signing for it. I can't just leave it with you. Anyway, we had a little bit of a row over that, and I'm not and have never been a yes man, so anyway, we got through that. I ended up, that's when I got, no, it's not. I went to 7th Corps Artillery, working in the S3 shop, and I worked there for a while, and I was assistant S3. I was the NROS, Nuclear Release Authentication System Officer for them. And
what does that mean?
There's a system, we have nuclear weapons, all right. The nuclear weapons are locked away. We don't tell people that, but they're locked away. But you have to have authority to use them. You have to, and it's presidential. It comes from the president down through the Air Force to the Army. Air Force, through the chain. It's not direct chain of command. It's an indirect chain of command. But we have to have it, and that part went through the Air Force and then down. And there's an authentication system, and there are devices on the weapons that have to be, you have to have two parts of the combination to be able to use them, and you have to have two different people in your authentication system to open the correct cards, and it's complicated, but that's the way it works. Anyway, I was responsible for training, for testing, for running around about that, and other things. We ended up being rifted from there. Went from Nuremberg Germany to Stuttgart Germany. We were living on the economy there, and got rifted and went back home.
Explain it. I guess I usually see that word as rift rather than rifted, but explain what that means.
Because of the reduction in force, the Army has set levels of officers to enlisted, and so when they reduce the size of the Army, they reduce the size of the officer corps. And there had been, I think mine was the 5th rift that they had, and I got when I was notified of it, and there's no recourse really. You got little stamps with Pentagon stamped on your papers. No, they've reviewed it and it's done, so you're out basically. So I was an officer, a reserve officer on active duty without a college degree, and my source of commission was OCS, and all those things counted against staying in. And so I was out.
Would they have allowed you to stay as a sergeant, or was that not an
I
option?
could have gone back. I could have gone back as an E5. When you report to OCS, you're promoted to E5. I could have gone back to that, and I declined. Okay. So I was out, and I went back to school. Decided. My wife and I went to the library one day. We were looking, they kept hearing rumors of more rifts coming along, and sat down and looked through some career publications and trying to say, what if I'm rifted, what am I going to do? And one of the things I wanted to do was be a veterinarian. My grandfather was a cow doctor. He wasn't really a certified veterinarian, but a lay cow doctor. And decided that's what I wanted to do. So when I got out, I went back to school. I went to Clemson for a year and got the prerequisites, and I did well. I applied myself and did well. And I had my wife told me later she didn't really want me to be accepted to go through be a veterinarian because of it's a hardship, and you're in school. You don't have much money, and. But I got accepted. I had one shot at being a veterinarian, and I got accepted. So then I spent 4 years at the University of Georgia. I was a year at Clemson, and I took animal industries, which taught me a lot. I didn't grow up on a farm. Both my grandparents were farmers, but I wasn't. We lived in town in Spartanburg. Anyway, I went to Clemson, and then I went to University of Georgia for 4 years and learned to be a veterinarian. And then when I graduated from there, I went to Junaluska Animal Hospital in Waynesville area of North Carolina, mountains of North Carolina. Practiced there 2 years. And then I went to South Carolina and went into a partnership with a guy, call him a 3P veterinarian. Which means he cures everything with penicillin, Panalog, and prednisone.
Okay.
3P veterinarian. Now you could treat a lot with those 3 things, I'll grant you, but there are multiple other things, and not a very progressive person.
Okay.
Okay. He had been there a long time, and then when he graduated, that was the degree, was veterinary medicine. It wasn't. For us, it was a doctorate, so you had to have at least 2 years of undergraduate. Most people had 4. So when I completed my veterinary degree, I went back and applied for a degree. When I completed the work, I applied for a degree from Clemson, and I got it. So I graduated from Clemson in April, and Georgia in May, a month apart because of their graduation dates. Anyway, so I have a DVM. Went to Junaluska, went to Union, South Carolina, and practiced. Started out in a partnership, and then ended up being a sole practitioner. And a year before that, I'd gotten back on reserve, back into reserve, to build time for retirement. And they called me one day, they were looking for active duty veterinarians, and I was burned out from veterinary practice. I lived a mile away from my practice, and every night I would leave at 5:30 or 6 o'clock when I could get away, closed at 5, 5:30 or 6 o'clock when I could get away, and have calls to go back every night. Okay? I changed my hours one time, moved from 5 to 6. I sat there from 5 to 6 and then had the same thing happen. So I changed it back. And if it's not going to help me, why bother? Anyway, I went back in as a veterinarian in the veterinary corps, and my first assignment was a 10th Special Forces group. I had wanted to be Special Forces before and didn't get in.
Okay. Now, what year was this that you're going back in?
1984.
Okay.
84 to 87, I was with the 10th Special Forces group.
And where were they based?
Fort Devens, Massachusetts.
Okay.
So I wasn't jump qualified, so I had to go back to jump school. Now at this point I'm 40 years old. And I went to jump school and broke my ankle on my 4th jump. And I spent 3 months in cast, about 3 months. And then I jumped again and got my 5th jump on the 3rd of April and jumped into Fort Lewis, Washington on Saturday the 6th of April, which is my birthday. When you jump after being broken, it makes you a little antsy, but we got through it.
Okay.
It was interesting jumping into Fort Lewis because it turned out to be a right rough drop zone. There were hillocks, and I picked out one of those looking at a soft spot. I had the broken ankle before, so trimalleolar fracture was a fairly serious thing. Fortunately, they didn't have to go in and mess with it. It was a closed, so it wasn't an open fracture, it was closed, and so I didn't have to, I healed better than I would have done if they had pinned things and done that.
So they could just hold it in place with a cast and...
Yeah, with a cast, yes. Yes.
So why were you jumping into Fort Lewis? Was this what
There was a way to get there in part. The National Air Guard from Rhode Island would fly us out there, and if we had a jump at the far end. So we loaded into a C-130 and flew out there, and we spent one night in Fargo, North Dakota, and then went out there and jumped in. And what we were going there for is they had part of the medical section. The medical section is involved with training for the 18 Deltas, refresher training, and that kind of stuff. And we wanted to send people to a mountain medicine course put on by University of New Hampshire. And they saw that there was a school called Mountain Medicine Course being given at Fort Lewis, Washington. And what it turned out to be, there was a medical battalion there, and this was a getaway for them, a treat for them to go up on the mountain and camp out. They hadn't expected us to do that, but anyway, we went out. It was a great fun time. We got a little bit of medicine and some cross-country skiing and some downhill skiing, and that was, and being from South Carolina, I did not have a lot of experience skiing. Didn't have any experience skiing.
So what do either the Army or the Special Forces have need of a veterinarian for?
I'm glad you asked. I was hoping you'd ask that question. You know, of course, that the Special Forces is engaged in guerrilla warfare. We took care of the guerrillas. We took care of the guerrillas.
As in African guerrillas, as opposed to
You didn't get the joke.
people with submachine guns?
No, no. What we really did. I told that once to a general. We went through a receiving line, and he asked the same question. What after the receiving line came? What? Well, we took care of the guerrillas. Anyway, It was, what we really did is anything to do with food stuff we took care of. Anything to do with animals, use them as pack animals and other things. How they ended up with a slot for a veterinarian in the Special Forces groups was out of World War II. And when they formed 10th Group was the first one formed. It was formed as a stay behind so when Europe was overrun, 10th Group was going to be there in Flint Kaserne over in Germany to organize the resistance. And the first soldiers were predominantly people who had been in World War II. They were foreign nationals. They had been in the resistance movements over there, and they had used pack animals. So when they looked at the TOE, they said, "Where's the veterinarian?" So that's how they got the veterinarian in.
Okay.
And they use them a lot. It's turned out to be a good thing because of the use of the military working dogs now. And military working dogs has become a big program throughout the military, not just Special Forces and not just the Army. So that's been a boon. But we do food inspections. I did a lot of things. I was also their preventive medicine officer, and it was a time when the medical department would not provide a MD to be a preventive medicine officer. So I did that as well. I just did it, and there are a lot of inspections and a lot of training and stuff like that to do for them. The other thing I did while I was there is I went to the Special Forces qualification course, and the officer branch, officer part of that, at Fort Bragg, and got through that. Have a long tab. From there, from 10th Group, I went to AMED advanced course. I'd been to the Artillery advanced course, but that didn't count because it was an AMED, and so I went to AMED advanced course, and from there I went to be the OIC of the UK and Ireland Division of Veterinary Detachment Europe, and it's a TDA, was at that time, was there. It was a TDA, not a TONE, a Table of Distribution and Allowances,
Okay.
TDA. TONE, Table of Organization and Equipment. So most units, the real units in the Army, the permanent units in the Army are TONEs.
Okay. This is similar to what they used to call TDY, the temporary deployment.
No, TDY is when you go someplace in
Yeah.
temporary duty.
Yeah.
This is more or less permanent,
Okay.
but it's been there, I don't know how long, but it's Table of Distribution and Allowances. You've got a mission that doesn't fit in with a TONE unit.
Okay.
You're not a field unit. We were not a field unit. It's what I did, I had 26 people that worked for me in England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, Northern Ireland, and they had 26 people, two civilians, and I had 2 veterinarians that worked for me. Part of the problem was that it had never been properly organized to function that way. And so we had basically 2 missions. The missions were to do the inspections, fulfill the role of the USDA and the FDA for offshore procurement of foodstuffs. That was one mission. And the other was taking care of military working animals and the civilian pets. So when I got there was an OIC, and there was one veterinarian in charge of the food inspection, and the other one was in charge of the animal part of it. And the one in charge of the animal part of it was doing the pet he made a circuit where he would go to different bases. It took him a week, and he, during that time he was away one night, spent one night away from home every week. The second week he was supposed to be taking care of the military working dogs. In Britain, because of the rabies quarantine, the military working dogs are owned by the RAF, but they're in use. What happens is, it was an agreement between the Air Force and the RAF, Royal Air Force, that they would get the dog, when a handler would come in, they would get the dog for the duration of the handler's time there, and it would go back to the RAF. And for that, we gave them $40,000. Okay? We took care of it all the way, everything else. And that was a big issue because there had been a letter written by the chief of security for the American Air Force there out of Mildenhall, because they weren't getting the support, veterinary support they needed. And so this veterinarian that came in, that was there when I got there, his thing was, well, do we own those dogs? I had a quick answer for him. Yes, we do. We give them everything they need, just like they're ours. And then he had a big to-do about being away from home and his child growing up without him. I had been in veterinary practice in the States and living in the same house with my children, and you're called away so much that you really almost grow up without knowing them because you can't spend a lot of time with them. So I didn't have a lot of sympathy for the guy. He also did not have a veterinary license. He flunked the national board.
Okay.
And they, at one point, you didn't have to have a license, but they had started requiring all veterinarians to have a license in some state, and he didn't have one. So the OIC was allowing him to have Saturdays off so he could study for his boards. You know he did, all right? I really believe he studied for his boards. He also had, the other OIC had a problem with him in that the Australian trench coat, the one with the cape and the slouch hat, he decided that was what he was going to wear over there. We were supposed to be wearing, our instructions said we dress like with a coat and tie, like the business population. Okay. And this is what he wore around, and the other guy didn't like it, but he didn't do anything about it either. And that was a quick fix. You can't wear that anymore. Well, everybody likes it. Well, this is not Australia. You don't fit in with the population. You can't wear that anymore. And the other one, our Dr. Fairchild, Sharon Fairchild, she was in charge of food inspection. And they had a list, and we were not great on computers, beginning of the computer stuff, had a word processor. And you know the old tractor feed paper?
Yeah.
Okay. There was a list of initial inspections that were required, that were behind. It was that long. I don't know how many it was. A bunch. Because you know it's a lot of inspections. And both veterinarians were paranoid about the OIC. It had right to be, because the OIC was not totally there either, frankly.
So where are you in the chain? Are you below the OIC?
I'm waiting for the OIC to leave until I took over.
All right, so how long a period was that?
It turned out to be a month or so.
Okay.
Longer than normal, longer than it should have been. But I got to see Carl Berryman, and things like he would degrade the British or blah, blah, and then put on his little hat and his little, do I look British? This guy's crazy. All right,
Okay.
come on. There's a lot of crazy people in the world, but you know, why do I keep running into all of them? Anyway, he finally left, and we separated things out. My commander, it was in Germany, was a full colonel, full bird colonel, and he had his own little hang-ups too. We had 4 TDAs. We had one we were operating on. We had one that should have been, and you never knew really what the real TDA was. But what I found out was, until I got somebody on the ground, when I went in, I had orders for Lakenheath. And Lakenheath is not where we were. We were in RAF West Ruislip down by London. But whoever wrote the things didn't know this. And I found out that until they got on the ground, I could move people around and get away with it. I'm not sure it was legal, but it worked. So I put people where they needed to be. And so the 26 people that I had were all in 1- and 2-man assignments. They were out there on the civilian slaughterhouses and inspection points, different places. It was a challenging job. It's one of the better jobs I've had, and I enjoyed it. I was on the road though all the time. I needed another veterinarian. I ended up dividing the territory into 3 sections. 2 had veterinarians in charge, and they did everything: food inspection and military and working dogs. The dog worked and the food inspection worked. And then the 3rd one, I didn't have a veterinarian for. We didn't do the animal care there, and we didn't have the mission, didn't have working dogs, and we didn't do the civilian dogs, and that was mostly Navy up north. And I ended up doing a lot of that. I did all of it really. Scotland and Ireland. Went to Wales several times. Interesting stuff in its own right. Went down to, in England, down to Cornwall, down the southwestern part of England, and there was a Marine base down there, and they wanted me to come and inspect some MREs that they had stored in a little hut, been stored there. They were like 3 years old or something. They were anyway, I did the inspection, and what I found was that they had been temperature abused. I mean, there was no heat, no thing, and it's just been sitting there for a long period of time. And so I condemned them, and that hit because I condemned those. They had to go back. The Veterinary Corps had to go back and recheck that whole lot, which is worldwide. Caused a little bit of a wave, but heck with it. That's what my job was.
Well, I was 3 years old anyway.
What the heck? Yeah, nobody likes to eat. They should have been eating them and rotating them out, but they didn't anyway. But we would go in. I would do initial inspections. Go in and inspect plants. We did. They were trying to get the milk suppliers under our FDA's milk plan, and then they were trying to get everything to fall under the FDA's plan for fluid milk, which is not. We didn't have a lot for ultra high temperature pasteurization. So what they did in Germany, this is our full bird colonel, nice guy, but still had his quirks. But his ruling over there, what they did over there is they pasteurized it first with the HTST, high temperature, short time pasteurization, which is what most of our milk over here is. And then they ran it through the ultra high temperature pasteurization. So you're pasteurizing it twice, and we did not have that option in most of the plants. The plants were very modern, the HTST plants, high temperature short time plants, most of them in Britain were run by computers. And what our plant in the U.S., the pasteurization requires a pump to be timed and set and wired set so it won't change the output. Well, if you don't have that, pump, and your pump is not a fixed volume pump, what we ended up doing was using the pasteurizer as the pump that set the volume. But in the British plants, many of them, the guy sitting on the floor supervising the milk going through, if he got too much blown back, too much didn't meet the pasteurization qualifications, he could change the temperature. And we couldn't allow that.
Mm-hmm.
We had to go through the pasture. It was very interesting, I thought.
You learn all sorts of things in the military.
Things that you had no idea you would ever needed to know.
Mm-hmm.
One of the worst things we had to do was inspect eggs. And the reason it was a bad job was because we have a different standard. In the U.S., we wash eggs
Mm-hmm.
and re-oil them.
Yeah.
Over there, they don't.
Mm-hmm.
So you had dirty eggs. People complain about dirty eggs. Well, you have to think about this guy. The guy gets up at 3 in the morning to be there by 6 in the morning when they start out. He's got a bunch of eggs, and they tell him how many cases he has to inspect. The plant people pull those cases out of the lot, and they run them through the machine, and you're looking, and you pick out, and you get, so they don't pass. They get one free relook. So you go out and you come back in an hour, and they're supposed to be reworking these eggs, you know? They don't.
Mm-hmm.
You come back in an hour and you inspect another batch, and they don't pass. And then they can call the contracting officer, not the veterinarian, but the contracting officer, and get another look. So you're working you start out 3 in the morning, you're working about 3, 4 in the afternoon, and it's about time to go home,
Mm-hmm.
and they're tired anyway, and they pass them just because they really haven't been reworked.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of interesting things I learned about food inspection and things like that. Go into a plant, and you've seen the thing on the news where somebody is licking an ice cream. I don't know if you've seen it or not. It's a fad that's going on, and I put it on YouTube, where they go to a store, take out a carton of ice cream, take the top off, lick it, put the top back on, put it back in. No lie. Well, one place you went in, and there was chocolate, and they had written something in the chocolate. Okay, well, you can't have that stuff. This is not right. Anyway, that was a relook.
All right. Kind of back out a little. So how long did you spend in England?
2 years.
Okay. And when do you finish that duty?
I came back to University of Georgia. I applied for long-term civilian education, and I applied for a PhD program. Well, I got into that and went back to the University of Georgia, and in the department I was in, not the school, but the department, they required you to have a master's degree, which I didn't have. So my major professor said, go ahead and start, and I will talk them out of this. Well, he lied.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a master's and a PhD in 3 years and 5 months. And the reason it was 3 years and 5 months, about a year out, I saw I wasn't going to make my deadline. So I asked for a 6-month extension, but instead of having me report on the last day of the 6th month, they had me report on the first day of the 6th month. So I didn't get, but I got it done, and I went on. So.
All right. So what field did you do the?
Microbiology.
Okay. All right. And what were you going to do with that?
Actually, what I did with that is I went to work for Walter Reed Institute of Research in HIV research.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like interesting, it sounds important, and it is, but it's like Trivial Pursuit. They've already looked for all the obvious things, and and I went to lots of meetings. I met all the famous researchers. And other than that, I can't say I personally accomplished a great deal toward, but you're looking at small things. We still don't have a good vaccine for prevention. I was working at the area I was working in was a vaccine for the prevention of HIV. I was not the lab animal veterinarian, but I ended up doing that. We had a civilian contractor who got another job and quit, and I was the only veterinarian on staff, and I ended up doing lab animal vet for a while through that. So it's interesting stuff.
Okay. Are you doing that at that point as a civilian, or are you still in the military?
I'm in the military.
Okay.
And then I hit 20 years and I had to retire. I had to retire, go on active duty, and I'd already been passed over for lieutenant colonel. So I decided to retire.
All right. Now, tape number 3 is
Oh,
about
gosh,
up. So
what's our time doing? 3:30, okay.
Okay, so we're gonna stop because I can. Okay, so we are kind of working through your veterinary career
Right.
in the military at this point. I think you had been talking about how you were involved with HIV research and wound up supervising lab animals and so forth. And when did you finish that particular stint?
That was 1996.
Okay.
It was August. I got out of the military in August of '96. I think the 1st of August.
Okay. And then from there,
I went to the diagnostic lab in South Carolina, Clemson Veterinary Diagnostic Lab in Pontiac, South Carolina, or just outside of Columbia.
okay.
I worked there for 7 years as a supervisory microbiologist, and we dealt with a lot of things. The lab had not had a microbiologist in a few years, and it needed a lot of corrections and those kinds of things. And we moved into a new building, which helped a lot, but just finding creative ways to get equipment was an interesting thing.
So that's kind of like being in the Army.
Very much like being in the Army. I had an interesting thing happen though when I first got there. Salmonella enteritidis had become an issue, and we had an outbreak that the FDA, the USDA had done all the chicken work, egg work prior to that, and the FDA decided to take it over. They lost funding for it, and FDA decided to take it over, and so the first case the FDA did was in South Carolina. There was a Mexican restaurant in Winder, Georgia, that they had customers had an outbreak, and the egg source for that was a company in South Carolina, and they found the salmonella in the chili relleno, chili and egg, and it was temperature abused, but the salmonella we traced back to the company. And the thing about Salmonella enteritidis is that we've had salmonella in chickens all along. Salmonella grows at a little higher temperature than normal, and the chickens have that higher temperature, about 103. The difference in this one and the other salmonella is that the others were in the gut, and this would go in, invade the ovary, come out inside the egg, and not the outside of the egg. So that became an issue. We ended up writing an egg quality assurance plan for the industry in South Carolina, and there were only 5 major producers. There might have been some backyard flocks, but these were all the commercial producers. There were 5 of those who were in our plan. Got it approved, all voluntary, and got it approved through the FDA, which was a major accomplishment because some of the other states, Pennsylvania, had been working on it longer, and didn't we beat them to it to get the approval from the FDA. Also, when West Nile virus came through, we coordinated with our Department of Health and Environmental Control in monitoring for the West Nile virus, interesting stuff. When I left there, I went to work for 2003. I went to work for the Joint Special Operations Medic Training Center with a contract company, Global Services, and it was the refresher training for 18 Deltas, the Special Forces medics, and I was the veterinarian to support that group and other work as needed.
At this point, are you meeting people who've been to Iraq and Afghanistan on missions like
Oh,
that?
yes. Well, this is part of, yes. You go through the Q course, the Special Forces Qualification course, to become an 18 Delta, and that's a year-long course. And so there's a lot of surgical training. The Special Forces medics are trained in surgery. They're trained as first responders, and they use animal models in their training. An animal model we used was goats. So my job was to be sure that the goats did not suffer at all. Follow all the rules, and that everybody was following the rules. Just kind of sometimes difficult with Special Forces troops, but only group that's worse is MDs. Okay. MDs have no respect for animals. I've learned this the hard way, but we get through that. I did that, and I also taught classes. They finally made this, converted that from a contract position to a government service position, and I did that from 2003 to 2010. I was contractor 2010 to 2012. I was a Army GS 13, and then I transferred to the Air Force as an Air Force civilian, GS 13. And
So why did you make that switch?
One of the things in making it switch from contractor to GS, that position put me under the military veterinarian. And the military veterinarians didn't appreciate that you're a veterinarian. They think you're more like a slave or a technician and want to tell you how to do your work. They hired me for a veterinarian, not a tech. And that job came open and I took it. And I've never regretted taking it. I liked working with the Air Force. They had one person doing that job, and she had a military career in the Army. I don't know if she retired or not, but she didn't get it off the ground really. So I took it over and had lots of contacts, and we got it going. In the Army, we used goats as our model, and this other one we used pigs. There's a lot of regulation and paperwork. You have to plan it well in advance. It has to have approval from everybody going. It's not something you just jump out and do. And when we're doing animal model training, it's not random. You have a set protocol, and this is what you do. And you really have to watch MDs when they're doing that, because they don't like to follow rules. They're kind of like these lieutenant colonels. Anyway, I did that until I retired in 2015.
All right. Now, I guess if you look back over the whole thing and the time that you spent in service, can you sum up in how you think that affected you or shaped you?
Everything you do shapes you, and it certainly did me. Okay, I was quiet, shy. I tell people I was shy until I kissed the Blarney Stone, which I did do. I did kiss the Blarney Stone, but it was more what I did in the service and what you have to do that brought me in a maturation, if you will. It's like being in Vietnam. It changes you. You don't want it to change you, but it changes you regardless. Special Forces training changed me. going to the instructor course for the Special Forces. They have an instructor course there, and that helps and trains you a lot how to present things, how to give classes. So,
Yeah. How do you think Vietnam affected you? If you look at that piece of
Vietnam
things?
affects everybody. You have a different outlook on life. There's a certain fatalism, all right? Part of the thing, like going to jump school, everybody worries about jumping out of airplanes, but so what? I mean, you got a parachute. That's you overcome your fear. I can say it certainly affected me. All right. I don't.
Yeah, but for you, it's really kind of one stage of many, because you had a whole series of
I had a
different
whole
things.
stage of, yes, many different things I've done, and you learn from each of them. Each of them changes you somewhat. You can't undo any of it. Other things I would have done differently, you bet there were. I recognize things too. If I had not had a wife and a child, I would probably be filling up a hole in Vietnam now. All right, because you can become addicted to that adrenaline rush and things. The one job I would have extended for, I would not have extended for any of the jobs I had. Although the one I liked best was being a liaison officer, but with the second of 506. But the one job I would have extended for would have been to be an infantry company commander, because they're the ones that do things. They're the ones that are in control. The battalion commander's not in control. He may think he is, but when he's flying around at 10,000 feet, trying to tell you on the ground what's going on, he's not in control. Brigade commanders, from the brigade commander above, they really didn't know what they were doing. I don't think. I didn't know the generals. Had very little interaction with them, but the battalion commanders had some control.
But they're not really leading men on the ground.
They're not leading men on. Well, I've been told some of them did. Okay, I've heard of some that did. Colonel Honeycutt, if you read about him, I didn't know him personally, okay, but if you read about him, he was an on the ground kind of a guy, and I just don't know. Colonel Lucas was not. He liked the helicopter.
Very much so.
He liked starch fatigues and shine shoes and air-conditioned hooch.
All right, well, since we are at a Ripcord reunion and we get back to that
Right.
ill-fated commander at the end, I guess it's probably a good place to wind up the interview.
I think
So
it
thank
is.
you very much for sharing the story.
Okay. I've got to go get